Shalom, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Mencer, Israeli government spokesman for the National Public Diplomacy Directorate here in the Office of the Prime Minister. This Monday, the 10th of March, day 521 of the October 7th war. Just two quick updates from me, and then we'll go straight to your questions. Please remember to put your questions in the chat, together with your news outlet, and we will take your questions. Let me start with the latest on Israel's effort to get our hostages home. Israel has accepted the invitation by the mediating countries, backed by the US, to send a delegation to Doha today. It was discussed at yesterday's Security Cabinet meeting. Israel's goals are by now well known: the return of all of our hostages, the elimination of the Hamas military and also their governmental capabilities, and the removal of the terrorist threat to our people. Returning to the reality that preceded the murderous attacks of October the 7th, 2023 is simply not an option for Israel. So this idea that you can somehow go back to the status quo is not an option. Hamas cannot create these wars every 2 or 3 years and then just go back and start all over again. Not again. Next to Syria and the truly disturbing images documenting what is a massacre of civilians in Syria. As HTS took over Syria, Israel cautioned the world to judge Syria's new regime by their actions rather than their words. And unfortunately, here it is. The dangerous reality and the brutality of jihadist rule and jihadi terrorism. Israel will not tolerate the presence of terrorist elements and armed forces that pose a threat to our citizens in the security area in southern Syria. And attempts by the regime's forces and terrorist organizations to establish themselves in the region will be thwarted. On these massacres, Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has made clear that the dangers of the HTS regime with the massacre of civilians, Alawites and Christians. This weekend, Mr. Saar has urged world leaders and European countries in particular to raise their voice against these atrocities. Now, when it comes to the Druze, Israel is prepared to defend, if needed, the Druze population in Syria from the forces of this new regime. We will not allow any harm to the Druze population. Okay, that's the last at the end of our briefing. Please put your questions in the chat together with your news outlet, and we will take some, and all of your questions indeed. Okay, first question here I can see is from George Dastis from EFE, the Spanish news agency. Any comments on Bola's statements on TV interviews yesterday? Is Israel concerned that the US might prioritize the release of hostages with American citizenship over others? Thank you for that question, George. No, we're not concerned about that at all, because we understand that the relationship between this White House and this government is as close as it has ever been. Our Prime Minister has called President Trump Israel's closest friend that we've ever had in the White House. And we are standing shoulder to shoulder to fight this enemy. And let me also share with you that when it comes to our objectives, we are absolutely in step with our American allies. President Trump has been crystal clear, and we believe that together with Israel, with Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. standing side by side with no daylight between our two countries, that we will be successful in getting our hostages out, removing the terrorist threat from the region, from Gaza in particular, and ensuring that Hamas, whether their governing or their military capability, will no longer be in charge in Gaza. Another question here from Enes Canley from the Anadolu agency. With the fall of the Bashar Assad regime in Syria, Iranian dominance in Syria, which Israel perceived as a national security threat, has decreased dramatically. We see Iranian officials making statements opposing the new administration in Syria. Similarly, we hear Israeli officials rejecting the interim administration in Syria. What is your take on Israel and Iran sharing similar views, finding themselves on the same page about a regional affair, especially as contested in Syria? Thank you for that question, Enes from the Andalou agency. I don't think there's a question of Iran and Syria being on the same page. Look, Israel as a country has nothing whatsoever against the people of Iran. In fact, we both share two very ancient cultures and history, and there's no reason for our two countries to be enemies. It is the regime in Iran which has caused all the problems here. They subjugate their own people, and never mind Israel. And they've been nothing but a source of terror. They've sought to strangle Israel with a circling of terrorist organization, their proxies, to try and strangle this country. We've pushed them back. Now, just last week, when it comes to the regime, the Israeli Air Force conducted a joint aerial exercise with the US Air Force. Now, this exercise was aimed at strengthening and maintaining the long-standing cooperation between the forces between our two countries, while also expanding connectivity and building integrated capabilities for a range of scenarios. Now, as part of this exercise, Israeli F-35Is and F-15Is aircraft flew alongside a US B-52 strategic bomber. During the flight, the forces practiced operational coordination between the two militaries to enhance their ability to address various regional threats. Now, this cooperation is absolutely key to the IDF and CENTCOM, which is the US Central Command, and it reflects the strategic alliance and close ties that continue to develop and strengthen between our two countries over time. Now, let me flesh out some of the arguments about Iran, because we've made clear over the years that we have no argument whatsoever with the people of Iran, but the regime cannot be allowed to achieve a nuclear weapon. President Trump agrees with this. Israel supports President Trump's maximum pressure campaign. It was working before it was interrupted. That means crippling economic sanctions, a credible military threat to counter Iran's nuclear ambitions. And now this strategy has deterred Iran until that pressure was removed. So from Israel's perspective, we welcome the restoration of the maximum pressure campaign. And it's clear from the recent visit of our Prime Minister to Washington, D.C. Indeed, President Trump welcomed our Prime Minister as the first foreign leader to Washington, D.C. on his second term, because they see eye to eye when it comes to the Iranian nuclear threat. So these maximum pressure policies should be restored. They are being restored, and it's Israel's long-standing position that Iran must never be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, and Israel will do whatever it takes to prevent that. Okay, that's our last question here today. Thank you for joining us. We'll have another briefing, no doubt, very soon. In the meantime, if you have any other questions, or we can be of any assistance, or if there are interview requests, please get in touch in the usual way. So please do stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.